There is a specific type of person who finishes a book in a single sitting, then spends 3 days unable to explain why they feel so empty afterward. Someone who understood the joke before anyone else in the room, but stayed quiet because explaining it would take longer than the moment lasted. Someone who has lain awake at 2 a.m., not because something went wrong, but because their mind found a thread and refused to let it go until every possibility had been turned over. If this feels familiar, there is a reason. And that reason is not what most people think. We were sold. For decades, we treated high intelligence as a simple equation. Higher IQ equals better decisions, faster success, more happiness. It sounds logical. It is almost entirely wrong, because what the research actually shows is something far more complicated, far quieter, and in some ways, far more painful. Psychologist Leta Hollingworth spent her career studying children with extraordinarily high IQs. She expected to find exceptional, thriving individuals. What she found instead was a pattern of deep loneliness. Children who had taught themselves to read at age 3, who could not find a single person who thought the way they did, who learned, very early, to pretend to be less than they were, just to survive a room. She called it the problem of the isolated mind. That was over 100 years ago. The research since then has only added more layers. Whilst engine that never idles, high intelligence does not make decisions easier, it makes them harder. A study published in the British Journal of Psychology found that people with higher IQs tend to overthink decisions that others make quickly and naturally. They see more options, more exceptions, more ways things could go wrong. You have probably felt this, standing in a conversation, already 3 responses ahead, while the other person is still finishing their sentence. This is not a flaw. It is the same cognitive machinery that makes you exceptional at complex problems, running at full speed, in moments that do not require it. The engine does not know when to idle. It was not built that way. There is a word researchers use for this: hyperconnectivity. A 2015 study in neuropsychology found that gifted individuals show significantly higher neural connectivity between regions that most brains keep relatively separate. What this means in practice is that your mind links things together that others simply do not see as connected. It feels like a superpower. Sometimes it is, but it also means your inner world is significantly louder than most people's, and you have probably never had a word for that. Until now. The exhaustion nobody names. Here is the part that is rarely mentioned. The exhaustion, not physical exhaustion, something harder to name. Research from the journal Intelligence found that highly gifted individuals often report a chronic sense of cognitive fatigue that does not respond to sleep or rest, because the mind does not stop when the body does. You have probably sat in a room full of people and felt more alone than you do in silence. You have probably said the real thing you were thinking and watched the other person's face go slightly blank. Not because they were unkind, but because what felt like an obvious connection to you had not occurred to them at all. And you learned, somewhere along the way, to leave certain parts of yourself out of the room, to translate yourself into a version that fits the conversation. Psychologists call this code switching for the cognitively exceptional. Most high IQ individuals do it automatically, without ever being taught, without ever realizing how much it costs. The loneliness of being. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes with this, not loneliness from being disliked. Loneliness from being misread. People often admire what you produce, but they rarely understand how it was made. Researcher Miraca Gross documented this in her 30-year study of profoundly gifted individuals. By adulthood, many had developed what she called a permanent sense of glass between themselves and others, seeing clearly, fully present, but separated by something invisible that no one else seemed to notice was there. If you have felt that, you were not imagining it. And there is something else the research almost never reaches. High IQ correlates strongly with what psychologists call existential depression. Not clinical depression triggered by loss, but a deep structural questioning that begins very early. Intellectually advanced children begin asking questions about death, meaning, and purpose years before their peers do. Before they have the emotional development to hold those questions, they arrive at the hardest questions of existence too soon, with no map, with no one nearby who has been there, and many of them carry that weight quietly into adulthood, wrapped inside productivity and achievement, invisible to everyone watching from the outside. That is not weakness. That is what happens when a mind grows faster than the world around it can accommodate. The other side of it, but here is something worth pausing on. Because not all of this is difficulty. Inside the same wiring that creates the loneliness and the noise and the exhaustion, there is something genuinely rare, a capacity for depth that most people will never experience. When you love something, you love it completely. When you care about a problem, you will not stop until every layer of it has been turned over. That is not common. That is not something that can be taught or practiced into existence. It is simply there. And researchers at the University of New Mexico found that the default mode network in high IQ individuals remains significantly more active during rest than in average intelligence populations. Your mind does not interpret quiet as rest. It interprets quiet as space and immediately begins to fill it. This is why your clearest thinking happens in the shower or on a long drive alone or at 1 a.m. when everything else has gone still. Not because those moments are special, because they are the only moments no one is asking anything of you. And for the first time in hours, your mind is finally moving at its actual speed. So here is where this lands. If you have spent years feeling like you are running on a frequency no one else could quite tune into, if you have learned to translate yourself for every room you enter, if you have felt the particular exhaustion of being the person who sees everything, holds everything together, and carries the weight of problems others have not noticed yet, you were not broken. You were not too much. You were running a mind that is genuinely different in its architecture. Not superior, not inferior. Different in ways that carry real cost and real depth. Both at once, always at once. Most people move through a world that was built for the kind of mind they have. You have been moving through that same world with a mind it was not quite built for. And you adapted quietly, completely, without anyone asking if you were okay while you did it. The question was never whether you could manage it. You already have, for a very long time. The only thing left to consider is this. You have spent years making yourself legible to a world that was not built for you. Maybe it is time to stop translating and let the right people learn your language instead. If this video felt like it was speaking directly to you, that's not random. At Mind Untold, we explore the hidden sides of human psychology, the thoughts people feel deeply but rarely say out loud. If this made you feel understood, subscribe and share it with someone who thinks like you, just so they know they're not alone.